Hey everyone, I'm Dan Sege from Hydro Ottawa, and I'll be hosting the Think Energy podcast. So here's today's big question. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Join me every 2 weeks and get a unique perspective from industry leaders as we deep dive and discuss some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations that drive the energy sector. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the Think Energy podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Think Energy podcast. PewDiePie, Dude Perfect, Holosoy German, Winderson, Nunez, and El Rubius. While perhaps not household names to you and I, they are powerful influencers to Gen Z's audiences aged 13 to 18. In fact, these YouTubers combined have 262 million subscribers and are more influential to this generation than movie stars and politicians. It's not surprising that today's consumers are increasingly more savvy and critical of branded advertising. Gone are the days where advertising messages and propositions were trusted and taken at face value. In an online world where advertising is seen as more intrusive than valuable, brands are struggling to find a new way to authentically connect to their customers. We are witnessing major communication disruptions. This includes declining television viewership, continued growth of social media audiences, an increase in ad blocking technology, media fasting, and significant rise of noise clutter on all channels. It's becoming increasingly more difficult for brands, particularly energy brands, to keep up with the digital landscape as consumers take extreme measures to avoid being advertised to. With demand for attention on the rise and overwhelming product options on the market, consumers are beginning to lose sight of who they can trust. Is the energy industry facing a Kodak moment? In an article that appeared in Adweek, Twitter said that users now trust influencers like YouTubers almost as much as their friends. This is the age of influencer marketing. So here is today's big question. Should brands consider adding influencer marketing to their everyday marketing mix? And is there a right way and a wrong way to do it? Our guest is no stranger to social media and the marketing world. He's the author of 3 books, teaches digital media to executives at Rutgers Business School, has a podcast called Maximize Your Social Influence, orchestrates digital transformation for leading businesses, and is fluent in Japanese and Mandarin Chinese. Dear listeners, please welcome Neal Schaffer. Hey Neal, how would you define influencer marketing, and can you give us some examples of brands doing it well?
Hey, thanks, Daniel. So influencer marketing is something that I think a lot of people are misdefining, or they're miseducated on, or they've been misinformed about. When I look at influencer marketing, I look at who has online influence, who has digital influence. So yeah, celebrities have digital influence, but there's a lot of other people that have influence because there's so many of us that use social media that build communities in the hundreds, in the thousands, in the tens of thousands. But even those people that have communities in the thousands are still able to influence others, right? And even in the influencer marketing industry, where they have gone smaller and smaller, with each year, they used to talk about macro influencers, then mid-tier influencers, and then micro influencers, which are people that have between 50 to maybe 500,000 followers. And then over the last year or two, we talk about nano influencers, people with 1 to 10,000 followers. And if you think about, I don't know about Canada, I'm assuming it's pretty similar demographic wise, but in the United States, the majority of the workforce are millennials. So these are digital natives that have been doing social media since it began. And they've built up communities over time, right? And so when you start to look around, you realize that there's a lot of people that already know, like, and trust us, that already may have some influence. These might be employees, these might be your customers, your followers online, people that mention your brand online that have some brand affinity for you. So, when so many people, when media influences become so democratized, and anybody can really have influence. And that's where I tell, the companies that I work with, don't just look at number of followers, but also look at that brand affinity. And your chances of success of working with nano influencers that actually are your customers are going to be much greater than working with a celebrity who just sees working with you as a one-time transaction. You really want to develop long-term relationships. So, there is, as far as brands, I mean, there are so many consumer brands that are doing influencer marketing. It's crazy. In fact, Estee Lauder is an example of a brand that they announced that 75% of their marketing budget is going to influencer marketing. There's one brand that I like to bring up as sort of a case study. They're called Rosefield, and they are a watch company. So there's a bunch of these like watch brands that you've never heard of them, but all of a sudden they pop up on Instagram and everyone's talking about them, and now they're a huge company. So they're actually, I believe they're originally a Dutch company. They also have a headquarters in New York City, and they basically have created really the ideal type of program that I talk about in the age of influence, which is really, build a long-term program of people that already know, like, and trust you. So how did they build the program? Well, they went into their email list, they went into their customer, database, and they looked at their followers. And just by doing this exercise, they found, wow, there's a lot of people with influence that already know, like, and trust us. And from there, some of them were better content creators. So let's use those to do, those people, maybe we work more on the content side. Some were really great, amplifiers. They weren't the best content creators or aligned with the brand, but they create a lot of great, they have a lot of great conversations. They can amplify. And then there are others that might refer us to other members. And they made it open to anyone and everyone. I mean, anyone can apply. And from that program, they've just developed a tremendous amount of benefits, increases all around the board in terms of KPIs. And all they've given to everyone that's joined is either exclusive access to, products before they go on sale, or basically shop points that they can shop for free. So there's no monetary transaction. And when I tell this to people, it blows them away. They're so used to this, pay someone $100 or $1,000 on Instagram, and we don't know where that money's going, or if the influence is real. Or so there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And I tell brands, really think holistically about who has influence. It's not just the celebrities. There's a lot more influence, a lot more people with influence out there. And if we go back to the model that, more than almost 20 years ago, this model that says the top 1% of online users or content creators, you then have 9% that are sort of engagers, commenters, and then you have 90% that are lurkers. Well, the top 1% of any social network is a lot of people. I mean, if LinkedIn has 500 million users, that's 5 million people that you can engage with, right? If Instagram has 1 billion, that's still, 10 million people. So there's a lot of people out there. Don't just think celebrities, really think holistically, and find people that you can align with and collaborate with for mutual benefit.
What was the driving force behind your book on influencer marketing?
So in classic sort of, content marketing or marketing, we want to serve our customer. We want to serve our community. And it's interesting because with coronavirus, this is my advice for every company. How can you serve your community? If you can't serve them physically, how do you serve them virtually? There are restaurants here in Orange County, California, where I live, that, you can order like a boxed family meal and they'll include face masks, they'll include toilet paper, right? It's one way of serving their community, even above and beyond your own product. So with that in mind, you exist, business exists to serve society. This is actually a quote from an executive at Walmart, believe it or not, that I like to share. And with coronavirus, we all sort of tap into that. So because of that, I am the exact same way. I'm an educator, I'm an author, I'm a consultant, I'm a speaker. So it's all about what are the needs in the market. And I really found about 2 to 3 years ago, this was a question that I kept getting a lot about, not just influencer marketing, but a lot of marketers that are saying, my friend is making $1,000 every time they post on Instagram. How do I become an influencer? So this concept of digital influence, I thought there was something to it. And the more research I did, Daniel, the more I realized all this miseducation and that it had a lot more power than most people and businesses knew about. And that's why I decided to write the book. And the book actually was a test market on a crowdfunding platform, but it did so well that I'm going to write the book. And then, HarperCollins leadership reaches out to me, and the rest is history. So, and I still think, when we look at marketing communications, right, you have a website, you have content for search engines, right? You have content marketing, you have email, you have social media. And I believe that sort of, collaborating with others through influencer marketing, whether it's employees or customers or outside people, it becomes another sort of pillar of marketing communication that I think every company should have a budget for. So I think it's going to really have long-term value. It's definitely not just a trend, but it's going to serve companies that read the book and listen to this podcast well.
Neil, let me ask you this. If the goal is to plug into the communities and connect energy brands to new audiences through the voice and trusted relationships of an influencer, how do brands ensure a proper fit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's an area where I think a lot of brands that just chase that number of followers model, there's a relevance in a few different ways. There has to be content relevance, right? So if there are, people out there that maybe once they talked about solar energy, right? So maybe you have a solar energy initiative and you want to align with them. But when you do further analysis, they talked about solar energy once in their last 100 posts. And really, they don't talk about solar energy at all. It's just something that came up. So this is a mistake. You use an analytic tool. Oh, they've talked about solar energy. You immediately contact them, and it's not their main thing. So that's one area where you may have misalignment is on the content side. You're working with the wrong person. And if you throw money at them, sure, they'll take it, right? I mean, some influencers really are in it for the money. Not everybody, right? Those are the ones you don't want to work with. But then there's the brand alignment. And this comes down to, the tone of their content, the visuals they use. And really, if you can imagine, if your content appeared in their feed, just from a philosophical perspective, would it be aligned with your branding? Would it look right? Would it look right in their feed? And would it look right to you as well? Would it look like a good representation? You can't really control how it's going to look. But if it's something similar in look and feel, what's that alignment look like? And this is why, Daniel, marketing is sort of this one-to-many approach, but I believe that influencer marketing is we can almost call it influencer relations, and it's almost more geared towards public relations than marketing because it really is a one-to-one. You really need to do analysis. You may find a few hundred people through a tool or through analysis, but you really got to dig deep into each one to make sure that there is alignment on those different areas that I talked about.
What kind of return on investment does influencer marketing offer compared to other marketing channels?
So there's already been a lot of data that says that, for every dollar spent in influencer marketing, you get $7 ROI or, you get double the ROI after 6 months compared to a traditional ad spend. So if you were to do a search for influencer marketing ROI statistics, there's a lot of studies out there. So I think that obviously there's no one golden rule, but there are many ways to leverage influencers. So obviously there is that brand partnership, brand sponsorship, sort of content sponsorship, content amplification, right? Where if you were to work with an influencer who agreed to amplify your content, what would that look like in terms of the engagement they get or the clicks they get compared to what you're doing, compared to like paid media, for instance. That's a really, really good way to compare it. But there's other ways of looking at it, Daniel. What if you're a smart, small brand who nobody is talking about online? Part of social media is about inciting word of mouth marketing. And the easiest way to do that is to really, collaborate with influencers, send them product, get them talking about your company. And that's a really high ROI just in terms of brand awareness that it's hard for you as a brand to create if nobody knows you, because you're going to have to create it through advertising. And that trust factor is just very, very different, right? But we can go even further. Well, we're creating our own visuals and our own videos, but these influencers are creating really, really good looking videos, really, really good looking photos, doing drone footage, but we just can't do it the same way that this content creator does. So, why don't we, instead of doing it ourselves or hiring an agency, why don't we just directly work with the influencer? So this is an area of working with content creators to actually lower your expenses sometimes and maybe get the additional benefit that they're going to publish that on social media as well. And then you get into, well, we really want to create a community of people we can tap into to understand what people are interested in, like a focus group, right? And this is another way you can leverage influencers. So the ROI, like anything else in social media, I mean, there's so many different ways to measure it, but there's also these intangible benefits that, invariably you're going to get when you do it right.
Can you share with us what are the most effective forms of influencer marketing? What are your thoughts on the value of sponsored content?
So sponsored content is really interesting. When we talk about sponsored content, it sort of taps into that, transactional relationship. We create the content, you publish it, and probably we're going to pay you money or something of that sort. So I think there's still a role that sponsored content can play. But it's always going to be more authentic and more trustworthy when it comes from the influencer themselves, right? And that's an ideal scenario. But we don't all have the brand affinity with every influencer. We may not have the relationships with each influencer. So that is a way to start a relationship, right? If you want to collaborate with someone, maybe spending a little money for sponsor content, for distribution, so at least your content gets out to their network, there's obviously value there. And really, Daniel, in the age of influence, there's a chapter of the 15 different ways you can work with influencers. And that definitely is one, and it's one that's been around for a while. But, based off that, what if in addition to that sponsored content, you were going to do a giveaway and say, hey, we're going to give you 1 year of free software, or we're going to give away 100 products. And then imagine that influencer, it makes him or her look good because they are indirectly sponsoring this giveaway where they're giving away free stuff to their community, right? And then they're going to want to promote that even more. So then you get to this win-win. And then what if, hey, as part of this, we'd love if you could, create another post actually reviewing the product that's part of the giveaway. Would you be interested in that? And then you begin to tap into that authentic voice of that person, even though you gave them the product. Hey, this company, sent me the product, but all my opinions are personal. They're mine. Then you get into a deeper relationship that I think, the more the influencer wins, the more it's in their best interest to collaborate with you and share your content, the higher the ROI is going to be, right? Where you want to get to a point where they're an advocate. They're going to talk about you without you're even having to ask. So as an initial entryway, sponsored content does have a role. And if you're working with big players, obviously sponsored content has a role there. But I would only use that as an initial strategy, not the final strategy.
Okay. Influence isn't necessarily tied to popularity. A large following is not necessarily a predictor of success in influencer marketing. What are your thoughts on working with influencers that are integrated and prolific on a variety of channels as opposed to those who limit themselves to predominantly one platform or medium?
That's a really, really good question. And I think that, marketing is all about getting in front of your customer. So you first got to ask yourself, where are my customers? If you are a B2B organization, you're probably not going to be focusing on TikTok, for instance, right? That's probably not where your customer is. So you definitely want to have those channels where your customer are. You definitely want to be working with influencers that have coverage on those platforms. Now, what you'll find, generally speaking, it's hard to be good at every platform. The only person that can do it is Gary Vaynerchuk, and he has a staff of, 15, 20, 25 people that allow him to do that. So for individual influencers, you'll find that they usually have one strong network. When we think about TikTok, we think about Charlie, this 15-year-old who's made it big in no time. So she's TikTok. There's Instagram people. There's YouTube people, right? And I would almost argue that, find people that are really good. If you could find a mix of people that some of them are really good at one thing, some are good at another, but they have your platforms covered, I almost think that that's going to be, in terms of reach, a better strategy. And it's more natural because it's impossible to be as good on all these platforms. There's just not enough time in the day to be able to do that, even for really, really good content creators. And we're people. So we tend to be passionate. Daniel, I'm sure you have like a favorite social network or two. I have a favorite social network or two where we tend to spend more time, and they're no different. So to expect them to be good at everything, I think is unrealistic. And I don't think it's going to serve you well at the end.
Knowing that a critical component of an effective influencer marketing campaign is establishing a trusted relationship with a relevant influencer, one who's in tune with your audience's need and desires, and whom your audience will look to when they're making purchase decisions. Is there a checklist for companies when aligning themselves with an influencer?
Here's the thing. So I consider, you're trying to develop relationships with a lot of people. So let's say you come from the PR world. There's 100 different newspaper reporters, media relations. You want to create relationships with all these 100 people. You might do the same outreach to all of them, but not everybody responds. So I think
No.
it's less of a checklist. I mean, yes, there are things you want to analyze to make sure they're the right fit. At the end of the day, you're going to reach out to a lot of people, and not all of them are going to convert. And what I mean by that is not everyone's going to respond to you.
Mhm.
Some will respond the first time, and then sometimes you have an autoresponder that kicks in a second email, and some respond to that. Some, if you go onto Twitter, they're going to respond through a DM, but everybody's different. But at the end of the day, not everybody is going to respond to your request for collaboration or your outreach. So you're only going to be working with a subset to begin with, those that actually responded. So from there, I mean, the only checklist is to have an open-ended conversation, right? What is it? First of all, how do you normally work with companies? Right? Have you ever worked with companies? What are the ways in which you work with them? What is your, how can we help you? Oh, you're looking for speaking opportunities. Every month we have, we have monthly town halls, here in Ottawa or wherever. Sure, we can put you on a panel next time, right? For instance, I'm just thinking out loud here. So, the only checklist is to be human and to listen instead of saying, we want you, we're going to ship you product. We want you to post, once on Instagram, 3 Instagram stories, all on different days of the week. And then over the weekend, we want you to post once on Facebook, once on Twitter, and we're going to send you a $25 Amazon gift card. And this is a mistake that so many brands make because they don't understand what are the needs of the influencer. What do they want to do? And if you offer that without asking, you could come to a situation where the influencer is so angry that $25 Amazon gift card would be worth their time, that they're never going to respond to you again. Maybe they put your email in spam filter or they block you, and you're never going to have a chance to work with that influencer. So it's always about, the most important checklist item is having that open-ended conversation. From there, sure. What are you going to do together? Make sure you follow up. They're people too. Sometimes they're late on things. How are you doing? How can we help you? But I don't think there's one standard, there's a checklist for the process that I went through, right? Which ends in them publishing content, you're analyzing that content. And then over time, looking into the program, who are our best performers, maybe do more with them, maybe try to bring some new people in, maybe the least performing people, maybe you don't allow in next year, you have these annual contract type of relationships, but there's no, as you can imagine, because everybody's so different and their needs are so different, it's really hard to have that one standard checklist I think every marketer would love to have.
Why has influencer marketing grown to become one of the most powerful form of marketing in social media and in general?
Yeah, so I think there's a few trends that have driven the growth and have increased the power of influencer marketing. And once again, we take a holistic perspective. We take a step back and we look at how, from a digital first mentality, how do we get the word out about our company? So we have a website, check. We're doing SEO, check. We're doing email marketing, marketing automation, check. We're doing content marketing. We have a blog. We're doing content in various forms, check. We're doing social media, check. Well, where else are you going to spend your money, right? And those are the main ones. But specifically within social media, there's a problem because social media organically just does not matter anymore. It's impossible for companies to get a lot of reach organically because social networks have truly become pay to play. So this pushes a lot of companies into using their social media budget for performance marketing or paid social, but then it's an advertisement. It's not the same. It's not organic. Some people don't trust ads. Some people completely block out ads, right? So that is one major trend that is pushing people from organic to paid, but paid is really not the solution. On the other hand, social media was made for people, not businesses. And who do users relate to? They relate to people just like them. That's why all these people have built these big communities. They're like us. They're not celebrities. These influencers did not start out as celebrities, right? They started as people like us. They're authentic. They're transparent. And it's very, very hard for brands to do that, to compete with that. They're not humans. We talk about humanizing the brand, but at the end of the day, they're not humans. Humans are humans. They have an advantage. So that's this relatability factor. Any brand could have become a TikToker, could have become a YouTuber, but they didn't, right? They had the opportunity, but they failed to do that because for many reasons that we can have another podcast episode just on that. But people have seized the opportunity and they have gained that influence. So, these are the trends. Even with coronavirus, it's no different. the trends are still there. And, with social media, this notion of sort of, viral word of mouth marketing, if you really want to get that going, it's not going to happen through paid advertisement, and it's not going to happen through your own organic social. It's going to happen through influencers, when other people that people relate to and trust start talking about your brand. So those are sort of the trends that push influencer marketing. That's why you have a lot of brands on Instagram just don't even publish their own content. It's 100% UGC or user generated content, in recognition of that fact they can't compete, and this content's probably going to outperform. So when you take that concept and you apply it to everything you do in marketing, you begin to see the power that influencers can bring.
Neil, is it fair to say that conventional marketing approaches don't stand much of a chance against the benefit content marketing provides? Where should energy brands be focusing their attention in terms of influencer marketing? Any recommendations and thoughts on leveraging user-generated content from influencers and repurposing that content?
Yeah, so actually, Daniel, it brings up something that I've yet to bring up, but one of my early clients was actually one of the utilities companies out here in California. Oh. And so I had a chance to work with their team, and they originally reached out to me because they were looking for a consultant that dealt with social media crisis communications. And what I taught them was that the best way to manage crises is to do it proactively, is to build goodwill, and do it. And this is actually, they ended up having a major crisis a few years ago. But before that, they didn't even have a crisis. They wanted to prepare for it, right? So by proactively building goodwill with your community, you're now building an army of people that will support you, right? Hopefully, when it's not a matter of if, when things happen, right? Because things in the utilities, there's always going to be these things, right? So then we start to look at, well, who are influencers? When I talk about influencers, I look at who is active in social media as a content creator locally. And for utilities companies, it's going to come down to the region where you live. Who are the local influencers? Some of them may talk about food. Some of them may talk about fashion. Some of them may talk about local tourism. But there's these lifestyle categories that you can choose from where you can find people, right, to collaborate with. Now, when I work with this utilities company, I realized, at least the laws in the United States are, if you share content from other sources, you are indirectly sponsoring them, and there are regulations regarding that. So that's what makes leveraging user-generated content for public utilities a little bit tricky. Now, this was several years ago, so I don't know if the regulations have changed any, right? So you, at the end of the day, may not be able to leverage their content on your platform, but it doesn't mean you can't create a relationship with them where maybe you interview them. So then it is your content. And probably interviews are something where you're not sponsoring them. You're reaching out, every maybe one day a week, you have a live stream featuring a local influencer. Man, if a public utility company was to reach out to an influencer saying, we'd like to feature you on our channel, can you imagine how ecstatic most people would be, the exposure they get? So this is what I tell brands. And, I've talked about brands very generally here, but it applies to utilities as well. There are a lot of things that you can offer influencers as part of a collaboration outside of money. And if you offer money, it may get tricky because of those same regulations. Mm-hmm. For instance, do you have an audio studio? Do you have a video studio? You could rent that out. Hey, I know you create a lot of videos. We have a video studio. Just whenever you want to use it, let us know. We'll let you use it. I mean, that is a unique benefit that you can offer. Or if you ever need a meeting room. I mean, these are little things, especially utilities, because you have such a big infrastructure that you can offer. And you do, it's funny, this utility reached out to me because they had a small business event. And where they part of utilities, you have a B2C, but you have the B2B, right? So for the B2B, they do these small business events. Let us help educate you on, accounting, finance, sales, marketing. And so I was one of the speakers. So this is another area in which, obviously, if you do events where you can reach out to influencers. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I don't know why, if I was a utility company, I would be proactively doing this, because that is really going to relate yourself to the community. Then the people in your community see you as a partner, as a collaborator, that you're talking to all these people that a lot of people think are cool, right? It just indirectly, it's going to shine on you, your brand, and it's going to make you, I believe, a more trustworthy entity because they're seeing someone from the company interview someone that I relate to. And I think that's a huge, powerful, really, really easy way that utility companies can begin. Now, if the regulations allow you to leverage user-generated content, that's awesome. So, when I work with this utility company on content strategy, obviously there's some content that's education, right? Please make sure, if you see a power line, please contact, 911. There's certain things that as a public utility, you need to put out there, once a week, once a month, whatever it is. And then there's always at the time, hey, make sure you sign up for e-bill service, right? There are many benefits for utility companies when people sign up online and do things electronically. It makes it much more efficient, right? So there's also these initiatives you have. And maybe you have like new rates or public hearings. So there's some public affairs things you need to have. But what are you going to talk about every day? The other stuff are community stuff, right? Now, if your utility company is very active in the community, as you probably are, there's a lot of stuff that you can be publishing about, which isn't directly related to energy per se, but it's indirectly related to what you're doing in the community. So with that bucket of content, similarly, these are community heroes, hashtag community heroes, where every week you're bringing a different influencer and how they're contributing to the community and how by, this foodie influencer has helped tons of small businesses generate, income during COVID-19. Thank you for your service to our community. Tell us, what are some of your favorite restaurants locally? This is, the utility company, because you serve people, you should become sort of the local voice, the local cultural voice of your community. And influencers are the key to help you do that.
How important are social listening tools as it relates to influencer marketing? Any recommendations?
Yeah, so social listening tools have, the earliest type of social media for business tool was the listening tool, because social media for business began with PR. If people say bad things about us, we want to know, right? Reputation management is where all this started back in 2007, 2008. Now, listening tools can still serve that purpose, and you should be listening to, if people are complaining, you want to proactively reach out to those people. But listening tools also give us the ability to find out who's talking about us. And if people are talking about us, and this is where we get back to finding people that already have brand affinity. There may be fans. As a utility, everyone's your customer, but some people like your brand more than others. So instead of listening to social listening to find the negative, you search for the positive, and you start to make a list of people. For instance, I was at a conference right before lockdown started, and it is a pharmaceutical company that actually makes something like these lozenges that you take that reduce the chance of your cold going on for longer than expected. And someone at the CDC here recommended that you take that as part of an effort to reduce coronavirus. So they were sold out. They were sold out for months. But the marketing director goes, Neil, how do I leverage this situation? I said, look, use your social listening tool to talk about who is saying positive things about you and start to develop those relationships. Even if you can't do any advertising now, you can still develop relationships over the next few months and then activate them when you can, when you do have factory capacity and you can start talking to people. Same thing with utilities companies. Who is talking? Who are the positive people talking about you? And start to make a list, right? And then you might notice some patterns. Some of these people have a larger following than others. Some might be specialized in food or travel. And some, might be mentioning you more often than others. And therefore, they have deeper brand affinity with you. So social listening tool is a really great way to begin to sort of figure out what are people saying about you from a reputation management perspective, from a sentiment analysis perspective, but also who might be fans out there. Who might have said, oh my gosh, I signed up to e-bill and now I save 5% off my bills for the next 12 months. Did you even know this service existed? Or hey, I just went to this event sponsored by, the power company. It was really cool. Have you ever heard of it? You just never know, right? So that's where I'd use social listening tools to really, you can proactively reach out to people like I talked about there. But when people are already talking about you, it makes it really easy to join the conversation. It makes it really easy, as I would say, slide into the DM to begin that conversation with them with a thank you or we're listening. And that can make they're human, right? That can make a world of difference in breaking the ice and beginning that collaborative relationship.
Neil, step one of an effective influencer marketing starts when identifying relevant influencers for our brand. Once we embark in this adventure, how do we manage those types of relationships? Do you recommend taking a campaign-based approach when working with influencers, or is it better to test the waters with only a temporary commitment to see how they resonate with our audiences? On a related topic, what should be considered for program management and metrics? What needs to be understood from executives and influencers alike?
Yeah, and I'd say the first step in an influencer strategy is not, influencer identification. It really starts with what's the objective? What are you trying to do here? So my voice for executives is, look, we're going to try to find people to work with, and we are going to vet them to make sure that they're aligned with our brand. We'll contact legal to make sure they're on board. If you want to review every one of these profiles before we collaborate with them, that's great. You have the right to do it. It's everybody's program. We're just helping the company, and we are not even going to increase spend. We're going to divert money from paid media to fund this, and we're going to try it out, and we're going to report back to you on how we did from a KPI perspective. And these are our objectives. Paid social not as effective. We want to get more word of mouth in social. We want to get more mentions. We want to get more, traffic to our website. We want to create more content, and they're going to help us do that. So really, what are, when you asked me that second question, Daniel, about, what are the KPIs? What are the metrics? Well, that is not unique to influencers. This is marketing, communications in general. What are your KPIs? If it's media relations, it's, number of publications, number of clips, whatever it is. I mean, it's no different here. It's the same KPIs that you'd have for content marketing or for paid social media as you have working with influencers, right? So, these are the things I think you need to keep in mind. And, when creating this sort of program, it is very much going to be based on one-to-one relationships. So I think it's totally okay to say, hey, we're just beginning a program. We want to make a long-term program, but right now we're just sort of testing the waters, and, we think you'd make a great fit, and we just want to see how we might be able to work with each other. And maybe, you do start a little small with like a pilot run of, a few or a dozen or however many. And you have them do one action, right? Whether we go back to that sponsored content, whether it is an interview, whether it is content co-creation, I mean, whatever it is, one action. And from that action, what were the results? And we have to remember that there are positive KPIs, but there's also, how did it help us reduce things, like reduce costs? Yeah. So we use an agency to record our video. Well, instead of having an executive go to our agency's video studio and record a video interview that got 10 views on YouTube over the last week, we worked with an influencer and did a live stream, which they shared with their fans, and we got 1,000 visitors. And when we archive this on YouTube, we're probably going to get a lot more than 10 views over the course of a week. And we didn't have to pay the agency money to do this because the influencer agreed to do it for free for exposure. So you really got to look holistically. Executives speak the language of Excel, right? What helped us boost things, but also, was there anything to help us reduce costs? And you'll be surprised with influencers, especially with content creation, you may find that to be the case. So, yes, start small. At the end of the day, you want long-term relationships. So, start with one activation, one campaign, and then see how it goes. And, some you're going to invite to the next one. Others, you may say, hey, it was great working together. We have a long-term approach. We don't have any, openings in our program now, but we'll definitely reach out in the future when we do, and leave it at that, because you don't want any burnt bridges here. These people may end up, increasing their influence over the course of a few months, and you may want to bring them back in to test them again, right? But that's sort of the effort. It is something I think one person can do, but it's like PR. You almost need to have someone that's dedicated to really managing those relationships, because it is going to take time, and influencers are busy people. They're not going to return your calls right away. They're working with a lot of other entities sometimes, and you want to be top of mind. So it's going to take time invested to work well with them.
Okay. What are some of the barriers and risks to working with influencers? Does it revolve around choosing who, how to engage, and the lack of control over messaging?
Wow. Yeah, there's definitely lack of control of messaging. But when you think about it, Daniel, I don't think that brands are in control of their messaging, because at the end of the day, people are going to say what they want about the brand, and they're going to share that in social anyway. So if you realize you never had control in the first place, you can try to influence people. But once again, it's coming from a brand, not a person. So, and people believe people like themselves way more than they believe advertising agencies or people that work in PR and marketing. So the writing's on the wall there. We have seen some influencer campaigns that ended up sort of tarnishing the brand. And a lot of that happened because it was transactional. Please make sure you copy and paste this message at exactly this time. And you've had a few influencers literally copy and paste the message, including that copy and paste this message part. And then it went out to social media, right? Or, thank you XXX for drafting me, in the NBA draft. And they forgot to fill in the name of the team that drafted them, right? So those are faux pas that happen because influencers are treated as programmable ad units, right? And it's transactional in nature. That's not what I'm recommending you do here. So when you work long-term, you don't have control, but I think it is totally okay to say, hey, before you publish, we just like to have a chance to review it and maybe offer suggestions on how to improve it. And that's your quality control. That is totally okay to do. Most influencers would say, sure, no problem. So that would give you the ability to mitigate risk. But I think the biggest way to mitigate risk is to do it up front, is choosing the right influencer to work with in the first place.
Finally, Neil, can you list the top 3 things brands should keep in mind when launching an influencer marketing campaign?
Make sure your objectives are very clear. Make sure you're choosing the right influencer, and really have this holistic perspective that says we're going to have an open-ended conversation, and we have a lot to offer influencers, not just money, right? But we're going to find out what's in it for them. We're going to let them do the talking. We're going to figure out how we can best align our program needs with the needs of that person for a truly collaborative, mutual win-win-win relationship. A win for us, a win for them, and a win for their community.
Okay, Neil. How about we close off with rapid fire questions?
Bring it on.
What is your favorite word?
I like the word heinous, believe it or not, because I don't know why in my university days it became this big buzzword. Me and all my friends, we'd always say heinous whenever something bad happened. And it's not a word you hear a lot about in the English language. So I'm going to stick with heinous.
What is the one thing you can't live without?
Netflix binge watching. Currently watching The Walking Dead.
What is something that challenges you?
Trying to do 48 hours worth of things in 24 hours.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Definitely time management.
If you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I grew up and I had a very, very long-term approach to my career and my goals in life. And maybe I tell myself, you don't need to be as long-term. And in fact, like every other entrepreneur will tell you, you need to fail several times before you succeed once. So maybe taking a shorter term and maybe doing a little bit more experimentation, I think might have accelerated to get me to where I am today.
We've reached the end of another episode of the Think Energy podcast. How can our listeners learn more about you? How can they connect?
Well, obviously we've been talking about influencer marketing, and that's all part of this new book that I just published in March of 2020 called The Age of Influence. So that's the easiest way to sort of tap into my ideas and my thoughts. I also have my own podcast called the Maximize Your Social Influence podcast. So we look at, marketing and sales and through this lens of digital influence. So if that interests you, definitely check that out. And then, neilschaffer.com, Neil Schaffer everywhere in social media, NEALSCHAFFER. There's a few of us Schaffers out there, but I'm the real Neil. So neilschaffer.com.
Again, Neil, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a lot of fun. Cheers. Thank you for joining us today. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode of the Think Energy podcast. For past episodes, make sure you visit our website, hydroottawa.com/podcast. Lastly, if you found value in this podcast, be sure to subscribe. Anyway, this podcast is a wrap. Cheers, everyone.